Well, here we go. It's that time again. Read a little bit more of Jeremy Thatcher Dragon Hatcher. We've gotten to the middle of the chapter, and Jeremy was just protecting um, Fat Pete the cat, and he got some scratches, so his dad was giving him some medicine. And remember, the dad stopped and looked at Jeremy's shoulder where Tiamat was sitting, stopped talking a little bit and looked a little confused, but didn't didn't ever say anything about a dragon sitting on his shoulder. So Jeremy's thinking that maybe his dad can almost see him. Let's see if we find out a little bit more. So he had just asked his dad if he could have some more of the medicine for the scratches, and I'll bet you can guess where he's going to put that medicine. When he entered the house, Jeremy found a letter waiting for him on the dining room table. The spidery handwriting on the envelope was the same as that on the magic shop's direction sheet. He waited until he had smoothed salve, that's the medicine, over Tiamat's wings. Then, feeling nervous, he opened the envelope. His fingers trembled as he unfolded the crisp paper. The words it held were both a relief and the worst thing he could possibly imagine. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I know I want to read this and I know you want to hear it, but when you are being a good reader, you ask questions. And I'm trying to think what the worst thing he could possibly imagine is. I wonder what that is. Let's keep reading. Thatcher, this is the letter. It will soon be time for the dragon to go home. Come to the corner of Main and Not Main at 11:30 on Midsummer Night. Bring the dragon as well as any teeth it has lost, any skins it has shed, and whatever bits of eggshell you were able to save. Be prompt. That means on time. S.H. Elives. Jeremy stared at the note in distress. He had always guessed that Tiamat would have to go home sooner or later. Part of him had even been eager for that to happen. Certainly, life would be simpler without a dragon to care for. But another part of him had hidden from that idea. He had never really prepared himself to cope with the thought of her leaving. He had let himself grow used to her sendings, the images she puts into his brain, her questions, her constant presence in his head. Now the very thought of losing her made a great wave of loneliness well within him. As it did, he found his head filled with an image of dragons, hundreds of dragons flying through a darkened sky. Home, sang a feeling inside of it. He blinked, and the image vanished. Jeremy looked at Tiamat. Home, she repeated, not in words, of course, but by sending him a feeling which could mean nothing else. Late that night, Jeremy was tiptoeing up the stairs with some chicken livers for Tiamat. Suddenly, his mother stepped into the hallway, tightening the belt on her robe. She looked at the plate in his hand and said, "What are you doing?" See, there's the question I was talking about earlier. I'm doing an experiment. You know how feeding meat to an animal compares with just giving it pellets and stuff? Mrs. Thatcher closed her eyes. You're trying to create killer gerbils? Does your father know about this? Jeremy shook his head. Well, check with him. He's been wondering where his chicken livers have been going. I don't think he'll be too happy to find out you're using them to play mad scientist. I'll talk to him about it tomorrow, promised Jeremy. Mrs. Thatcher nodded, then walked into the bathroom. Jeremy waited until she had closed the door. then dashed to his own room. He found Tiamat crouched in the middle of the floor, trying to breathe flame. "Stop that," thought Jeremy, as he put the livers in front of her. "You'll scorch the floor." "I want to make fire," thought Tiamat, as she started to gobble the livers. "Do you suppose you could cut back on those?" asked Jeremy. "I think I'm going to have to start buying them out of my allowance." Tiamat sent an image of a plateful of gerbils, his pets, lying on their backs, their little paws stiff before them or above them. "Forget it," said Jeremy. "I'll buy you the chicken livers." A red and gold sigh trickled through his head as the dragon returned her attention to her meal. The next morning, Jeremy found Tiamat sitting on his desk, preening her burnished scales. Lying beside her was another discarded skin. Her tail, which now hung over the edge of the desk, reached nearly to the floor. Are you ready? Oh, look at that. Remember when Tiamat was just hatched, he said that her head was as big as his thumb. Jeremy rolled the crinkly red skin and put it with the others. As he did, he wondered again how big she was going to get. "Big," replied Tiamat cheerfully. "Too big for this room," thought Jeremy, stroking her head, which was now wider than his fist. Remember? So from this size, thumb size, to this size. And longer than his foot. In fact, if she continued to grow at this rate, it wouldn't be long before she would no longer fit through the door. He wished he could get a little of that growing ability for himself. "What am I going to do with you?" he thought. Tiamat curved her neck around his arm. "Send me home," she replied in a combination of pictures and feelings. Jeremy's stomach tightened. When he had gone to bed last night, he had considered ignoring the summons. The summons is the letter saying, "Bring her," that had come from the magic shop. When midsummer night came, or whatever that was, he would just stay right here with Tiamat. The idea had been a little frightening, but not as frightening as losing the dragon. But if she wanted to go, well, that was different. He couldn't keep her here against her will. A wave of sadness, muddy green and dark brown, rolled through him. He understood. Tiamat didn't want to go, not entirely, but she knew she had to. But where? Where was home? Well, he knew one place where he might find an answer. Miss Priest's book. He could sense Tiamat's approval when he took it to his desk and began to read. "Listen to this," he said after a while. Tiamat closed her eyes and listened while he read from the book. The time came when the world was no longer safe for dragons. Earth had too many heroes, too many swords, and not enough magic. One by one, the great dragons were being slaughtered. That means killed. In an attempt to save the last dragons, the wizard Bellenmore opened a door between the worlds. Through this gate, the remaining dragons passed to the new world, and that was to be their home. It was a harsh world, but it was a world without men, and therefore safer for dragons. Yet, as things turned out, there was still a problem. Suited as this world was to the great beasts, it was unfit for their eggs. Though many eggs were laid, for over 100 years, not one new egg hatched. Dragons live for a tremendous time, of course. But during the 2nd century of this blight, that's a problem, they began to fear that their kind would become extinct after all. Finally, the dragons contacted Bellenmore's successor, Aaron the Wise, later known as Aaron Dragonfriend, and requested his aid. Aaron brought a dragon's egg home with him to see if it could be hatched here in this world where dragons had once lived. He discovered that without our moon to quicken it, a dragon's egg remains dormant forever. With this knowledge, he was able to hatch the egg. Later, when the dragon had grown too large to stay here safely, Aaron faced great peril to send it back to the rest of its kind. This was the beginning of the Company of Hatchers. Since that first hatching, a handful of eggs have come through this world each decade. That's 10 years. Each egg is held out of sight of the moon until the right person appears. Then the egg is entrusted to the hatcher, who must guard the young dragon and, when the time is right, help it to go home. Jeremy closed the book and sighed. It looked like he had better find out about Midsummer Night.